In 1968, the American Heart Association made an announcement that changed how an entire generation of Americans ate breakfast. The recommendation was simple and specific: no more than 3 egg yolks per week, and limit dietary cholesterol to less than 300 milligrams a day. It became one of the most well known nutrition rules in history. Doctors repeated it, schools taught it, families followed it. Millions of seniors alive today have spent decades eating egg white omelets or no eggs at all, specifically to protect their heart. In 2015-40, 7 years later, the US Dietary Guidelines for Americans quietly did something remarkable. They removed the 300 milligram cholesterol limit entirely. No fanfare, no press conference. Just a change in the guidelines that most people never heard about. If you are over 60 and you have been limiting eggs because you were told they would raise your cholesterol, this video is for you. Because the science that led to that warning has shifted significantly over the last 3 decades. And the guidance that most doctors are now giving, if they have time to give it, is very different from what most seniors were told as younger adults. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what the original egg warning was based on, why the science moved away from it, what the current evidence and current guidelines actually recommend, and the one real caveat that still matters for some people. To understand where the egg warning came from, you need to understand what scientists knew in the 1960s. Researchers had established a clear link between elevated LDL cholesterol in the blood and cardiovascular disease. That link is real. It is still accepted today. The next step in the reasoning seemed logical at the time. If high blood cholesterol raises heart disease risk, and eggs are high in dietary cholesterol, then eating eggs must raise blood cholesterol. And if eating eggs raises blood cholesterol, then eating eggs raises heart disease risk. Each link in that chain seemed solid. The problem was the middle one. Here is what decades of subsequent research revealed. Your body has a feedback system for cholesterol. When you eat more dietary cholesterol from eggs or any other source, your liver typically compensates by producing less of its own cholesterol. This does not happen perfectly in every person. Roughly a quarter of the population are what researchers call hyperresponders. Their blood cholesterol does rise meaningfully when they eat more dietary cholesterol. But for most people, the body's internal regulation system largely offsets the dietary intake. This is why the Framingham Heart Study, one of the most important long-term cardiovascular studies ever conducted, found no significant association between egg intake and blood cholesterol levels or heart disease. When researchers started following large populations over long periods of time rather than measuring short-term cholesterol responses in controlled settings, the relationship between eating eggs and having heart disease turned out to be much weaker and more complex than the 1968 warning suggested. Here is the part of the story that is rarely explained. The original egg research had a confounding problem. Confounding means something else was going on that researchers were not properly separating from the eggs themselves. In most of the early studies, people who ate a lot of eggs also tended to eat a lot of bacon, sausage, toast with butter, and other foods high in saturated fat. Saturated fat, not dietary cholesterol, is what raises LDL blood cholesterol most reliably in most people. The researchers were measuring what the whole breakfast did, not what the egg did. Eggs are low in saturated fat. They are high in dietary cholesterol. But those are two different things, and for decades they were conflated. So where does the evidence stand today? A 2022 meta-analysis published in the journal Frontiers in Nutrition brought together data from 55 studies covering nearly 2.75 million people. Its conclusion on egg consumption and cardiovascular mortality was clear. Little evidence of elevated risk was seen for intakes below roughly half an egg per day, and the broader picture showed no consistent elevated risk for moderate consumption. A Harvard research team analyzing up to 32 years of follow up data from three major cohort studies found that moderate egg consumption, defined as up to one egg a day, was not associated with cardiovascular disease risk overall. And in 2025, the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee, the expert body that shapes nutrition policy for the entire United States, concluded that current scientific evidence indicates that when consumed as part of a healthy dietary pattern, egg consumption does not negatively impact blood cholesterol levels. There's specific recommendation for healthy older Americans up to 2 eggs per day. Before I give you the practical guidance, I want to be honest about what the evidence can and cannot tell us. This is for educational purposes only, and individual health circumstances always matter. If you have familial hypercholesterolemia, a genetic condition that affects how your body handles dietary cholesterol, or if you have been told by a doctor that your LDL is dangerously elevated and resistant to normal management, your situation may be different from the general picture I am describing. For most healthy adults over 60, the current consensus is clear, but your doctor knows your specific numbers. If eggs have been a concern in your household, that conversation is worth having. Here is what makes this especially relevant if you are over 60. For someone who has been avoiding eggs, the nutritional cost of that avoidance may have been significant. A single egg contains 6 grams of complete high-quality protein, including leucine, the specific amino acid that triggers the muscle-building signal we covered in our earlier video on sarcopenia. For older adults trying to hit their protein targets at breakfast, eggs are one of the most affordable and effective tools available. Beyond protein, eggs are one of the best food sources of choline, a nutrient most older adults are chronically short on, and one that plays a documented role in brain function. This is not a supplement, this is a whole food, costing less than almost any other source of complete protein available. The real lesson of the egg story is not just about the egg. It is about the breakfast you build around it. Research consistently shows that the saturated fat in a meal matters far more for most people's blood cholesterol than the dietary cholesterol in that same meal. 2 eggs scrambled in butter, alongside bacon, sausage, and white toast, that is a high saturated fat breakfast. The eggs are not the problem there. The surrounding choices are 2 eggs with spinach cooked in a small amount of olive oil alongside whole grain toast or fruit, that is a genuinely heart protective breakfast that also delivers everything your muscles need before noon. The egg itself is not your enemy. The full breakfast pattern is what matters. Here is the one sentence that matters most from this video. The 1968 warning about eggs and cholesterol was based on science that has since been substantially revised, and the current guidelines from both the Dietary Guidelines for Americans and the American Heart Association support moderate egg consumption as part of a healthy dietary pattern for most adults over 60. If you have been limiting eggs for years based on old advice, you now have the information to revisit that decision. Check with your doctor if you have specific cardiovascular concerns. But for most people over 60, 1 to 2 eggs a day is supported by the current evidence. This is the kind of information that changes quietly in the science while most people are still following advice from decades ago. Nobody sends you a letter when the guidelines change. That is what this channel is here for. Every week. One thing your doctor didn't have time to explain. If this helped you today, subscribe. Every week, I bring you one thing that makes your good health decisions even better. Before you go, we have now spent 10 videos covering what the science says about your food, your medication, your muscles, your brain, and your sleep. Next week, I am covering something that belongs in every senior's kitchen, but most people stopped eating it in their 30s or 40s because they assumed it was food for children. It is inexpensive. It is widely available. Most doctors would quietly celebrate if you told them you had started eating more of it. And the research on what it does for muscle, gut health, blood sugar, and cognitive function after 60 is more compelling than almost anything else in this field. That is next week. Don't miss it.